Their families have been feuding for 30 years. The committee drew two names, hers, his. Now they can't escape each other. This is At War with Mr. Ashford, a Regency romance audiobook. Let the story begin. Chapter 1. The Drawing of Names. Wiltshire, April, 1815. The Midsummer Relief Ball Committee met on the third Tuesday of April in Mr. Holt's front parlour, which smelled of beeswax and old hymn books, with 8 chairs arranged around a table pushed to one side to make room for 4 more. It was the sort of room designed for mild civic virtue. The watercolour of the local church above the fireplace, the neat stack of last year's subscription ledgers on the windowsill, the plate of seed cake that nobody touched until the meeting was over. Miss Philippa Vane arrived at 5 minutes to the hour and took the chair nearest the window. She was, as her friend Mrs. Dora Finch had once observed with great affection, incapable of arriving late to anything. She was also, as Dora had observed with slightly less affection on a separate occasion, incapable of sitting in a room without quietly organising it. By the time the clock on the mantelpiece struck 2, she had reviewed Mr. Holt's draft programme for errors, identified 3, and was waiting with patient composure for the meeting to begin. She was tall, taller than most of the men in the room, which she had long since stopped finding remarkable, with chestnut hair pinned close to her head and grey-green eyes that read a room in one sweep. She wore a pale blue morning gown with a high neck and a narrow sash, a short Spencer jacket in cream wool against the April chill, and her mother's pearl earrings. Mr. Holt arrived next, full of apologies for nothing in particular, followed by Mrs. Partridge from the Poor Relief Board, Colonel Marsh, the 2 Mrs. Caldwell, and Mr. Fenwick from the Subscription Committee. Then the door opened again, and Philippa did not look up from Mr. Holt's programme. She did not need to. She knew from the way the room went fractionally still exactly who had arrived. Mr. Crispin Ashford stood in the doorway with the easy authority of a man accustomed to being the tallest person present, and he was considerably taller than she was, which she had never quite forgiven him for. Broad across the shoulders, dark-haired with a strong jaw and dark brown eyes that moved across the room as hers had. The same practised assessment, only unhurried. There was a slightly crooked line to his nose, an old break, never quite set straight, that fell just short of conventionally handsome, and was better for it. He wore a well-cut charcoal coat and buff breeches, a plain white cravat, and an expression that conveyed polite attention and suggested, very faintly, that he would find the same 3 errors in Mr. Holt's programme that she had. She did not approve of him. She had not approved of him for 11 years, and nothing she could currently observe was offering any grounds for reconsideration. He found her gaze across the room. He gave a short, formal nod, the kind that could mean good afternoon, or I acknowledge your existence under protest. She returned it in the same currency. They had not spoken in 4 years. Mr. Holt called the meeting to order with the particular cheerfulness of a man who appeared to be the only person in Wiltshire unacquainted with 30 years of local history. He worked through the agenda at a steady pace. The subscription total, the venue question, the matter of the orchestra. When he reached the 4th item, the appointment of co-chairs for the ball, he produced a small cloth bag with the air of a man presenting something rather exciting. Every other person present had gone slightly still.
Names of all eligible families,
He said, untying the drawstring.
as always, drawn at random, in the interest of fairness.
Mrs. Partridge cleared her throat.
Perhaps this year we might simply ask for volunteers.
The tradition of the draw is what gives the appointment its
Mr. Holt paused, searching for the word.
legitimacy.
Its legitimacy,
Repeated Colonel Marsh, with a glance at Philippa that she declined to acknowledge. Mr. Holt put his hand in the bag. The first name he drew was Vane. The second name he drew was Ashford. The room fell into the specific silence of 8 people concentrating very hard on not reacting. The Vane and Ashford families had not been on civil terms for 30 years. Everyone in the room was aware of this. Mr. Holt, apparently, was not. Mrs. Partridge found something to examine on the tablecloth. Colonel Marsh's moustache shifted. The elder Miss Caldwell studied the watercolour of the church with sudden, consuming interest. Philippa set Mr. Holt's programme down on the table.
"How fortunate,"
she said pleasantly.
"I accept."
As do I.
Crispin Ashford's voice was low and unhurried, and he said it without looking at her. He did not appear discomfited in the slightest, which she found considerably more irritating than discomfiture would have been. Mr. Holt beamed.
Splendid. Absolutely splendid. I'm sure it will be the finest ball we've had in years.
Nobody liked to disagree with Mr. Holt. He took it so badly. The rest of the meeting passed in the usual way. Philippa took notes. Mr. Ashford asked 2 precise questions about the subscription accounts and received 2 satisfactory answers. Both questions, she noted with some resentment, were better than any she had thought to ask. They did not address each other directly. When Mr. Holt suggested that the 2 co-chairs might wish to arrange an introductory meeting before the next committee session, the words hung in the air for a moment.
Ashford Park has the larger rooms.
Said Mr. Ashford.
More practical for laying out plans.
"Vane House is closer to town,"
Philippa replied.
"more practical for everything else."
A brief silence.
Wednesday,
Said Mr. Ashford.
at 2:00.
"I am engaged Wednesday afternoon."
Said Philippa, who was not.
Thursday, then.
"Thursday suits me perfectly,"
She said, in a tone that suggested it did not.
Vane House.
Said Mr. Ashford, in a tone that suggested he was conceding the point. Philippa suspected he had never intended anything else.
"Vane House."
Philippa agreed, in a tone that suggested she knew he had never intended anything else. He wrote something in the small notebook he had produced from his coat pocket. His handwriting, she noticed, was very neat. This too she disapproved of. The carriage home took 20 minutes. Philippa spent the first 5 watching the hedgerows slide past the window, and the next 5 reviewing the situation methodically. The ball was in 8 weeks. There was a great deal to be arranged. She was, as anyone who knew her would confirm, perfectly capable of arranging a great deal. The involvement of an Ashford was a complication, not an obstacle. She had managed far more difficult things. She was 31. She had not yet failed at anything she had put her mind to. She had managed the winter quarter sessions when her father's gout had kept him to his bed for 3 weeks. She had managed the disputed tenancy on the East Field and the business with the mill accounts. She had managed, without complaint or error, 4 years of her father's household and correspondence and social calendar. She did not like Mr. Ashford's composure. She did not like the way he had accepted the draw without the slightest visible discomfort, as though 8 weeks in her company were a matter of complete indifference. She did not like his questions, which had been good ones. She did not like his handwriting. She was aware that none of these constituted reasonable objections, which did not make her feel any better about them. She could manage 8 weeks of civil cooperation with Crispin Ashford. The feud, such as it was, had begun 30 years ago and showed no signs of concluding. The details were these. Mr. Crispin Ashford's aunt, Miss Caroline Ashford, had been engaged to Philippa's father, Sir George Vane. 3 weeks before the wedding, Miss Ashford had broken the engagement without explanation, without apology, and, as far as the Vane family had ever been able to determine, without remorse. Sir George had been left to manage the embarrassment alone. The Ashford family had offered nothing. No accounting, no regret, no acknowledgement that anything had been done at all. The Vanes had concluded reasonably that the Ashfords were not the sort of people one needed to know. This was the version Philippa had grown up with. She had no reason to doubt it. The carriage rounded the long bend below Vane House, and the house came into view, its pale stone catching the last of the afternoon light. She had always thought it looked best at this hour, steady and familiar, the kitchen garden visible over the wall, the tulip beds along the front path coming into colour. She had been to Ashford Park once, years ago, at some long-forgotten county occasion. She could recall the entrance hall, the proportions of the main rooms, the aspect of the grounds, none of it potentially relevant to 8 weeks of charity organisation. What she recalled most clearly, and could not account for, was the library, glimpsed through an open door as she passed. Floor to ceiling, south-facing, a reading table set close to the window. She could not think why she had remembered that particular detail. She stopped thinking about it. The carriage pulled up to the door, and she stepped down before the footman had quite reached the step. 8 weeks, she told herself. Perfectly manageable. She went inside. The carriage home took Crispin Ashford 25 minutes, which was 4 minutes longer than it should have been owing to a cart that had shed a wheel at the bottom of the Holt Lane and showed no urgency about resolving the matter. He spent the delay considering the situation with the detachment he applied to all problems of an inconvenient nature. Miss Philippa Vane. He had formed his opinion of her some years ago and had seen no reason to revise it. She was a bluestocking of the most committed variety, the kind who had read everything, remembered all of it, and was constitutionally incapable of pretending otherwise. She managed her father's estate with a competence that was, by all accounts, considerable, and she had apparently concluded at some point that a husband would only complicate the arrangement. She was, as far as he could determine, a spinster of the most deliberate kind. Crispin had not decided whether he found it admirable or simply inconvenient. This was, he was aware, a fairly hypocritical position for a man of 33 who had himself not yet married. His reasons, he felt, were entirely different. He had spent the better part of a decade restoring an estate his brother had done his level best to ruin. There had not been time. He had not met anyone who seemed worth the disruption. He did not examine this reasoning very closely. She was also, he reflected, very tall. He was not accustomed to looking across a room at a woman rather than down at one, and he was not entirely certain how he felt about it. This seemed an unreasonable thing to object to, so he set it aside. She had not looked up when he entered. He had noticed. He was not sure why he had noticed, and he was less sure why it had stayed with him throughout the entire meeting. But it had. Miss Vane had reviewed her programme, identified its errors. He had spotted 3. He suspected she had found the same, and had not glanced toward the door even once. As though his arrival were a matter of complete indifference. As though she had already taken his measure and found nothing worth the interruption. He did not like it. He was aware that disliking a woman for not staring at him was not a position he could defend in any company, so he resolved to keep the opinion to himself. What he could reasonably object to was the rest of it. The way she had accepted the draw with that perfectly pleasant smile, as though being assigned 8 weeks in his company were no worse than a change in the weather. The way she had claimed to be engaged on Wednesday, in a tone that suggested she was not. The notes she had taken, neat, continuous, and almost certainly more comprehensive than his own, which were precise but selective. He did not object to competence. He respected competence. He simply would have preferred, on this particular occasion, to have demonstrated rather more of it than she had. The cart moved. The carriage resumed. Ashford Park came into view as the last of the daylight went, its windows lit from within, the east wing still wrapped in scaffolding from the seemingly never-ending stonework repairs. It was a good house. A great deal of work had gone into making it so, and a great deal remained. The history between the families was not, in his view, complicated. 30 years ago, his Aunt Caroline had been engaged to Sir George Vane. The Vane family had made plain, in the particular way such things were made plain in polite society, through tone and silence and the careful withdrawal of warmth, that Miss Caroline Ashford was not quite what they had hoped for, not enough fortune, not quite the right connections. Caroline, who had more dignity than the situation deserved, had withdrawn quietly. The Vanes had then had the extraordinary effrontery to present themselves as the injured party. The Ashfords had not forgotten this. This was the version Crispin had grown up with. He considered it accurate in all essential particulars. He had not yet met a problem he could not solve. 8 weeks, he told himself. It was a committee arrangement. Nothing more. He went inside and did not think about her grey-green eyes, which had read the room in one sweep and apparently found nothing worth a second look. He did not think about them at all. Chapter 2. The First Meeting. Vane House, April 1815. Crispin Ashford arrived at Vane House at 2 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. Not 2 minutes past, not a quarter to, 2 o'clock precisely, as though he had timed the journey from Ashford Park with a pocket watch and slowed his pace at the gate. It was, Philippa decided, the most irritating possible way to arrive. She received him in the front parlour, which was a good room, well-proportioned, south-facing, the furnishings neither showy nor shabby. The fire had been lit against the April chill, the tea-things arranged on the low table, and 2 chairs positioned at a business-like distance from one another. Philippa had given some thought to the arrangement of the chairs. He took in the room in the same assessing sweep she had observed at the committee meeting: fire, chairs, tea, the folder set on the table beside her, and offered no opinion on any of it. He wore a dark green coat, well cut, with the same plain white cravat as before. He had the look of a man who dressed for function rather than effect and achieved both, which was a further irritation she filed away for later.
Miss Vane.
Mr. Ashford,
She gestured to the chair across from hers.
please sit.
He sat. He accepted tea without comment. She poured without fuss. They were, she reminded herself, here to organise a charity ball. Nothing more.
I thought we might establish some ground rules before we proceed.
I thought the same.
He produced his notebook. Of course he had. The rules, as they arrived at them over the following quarter hour, were these: all decisions to be made jointly, neither party to involve their respective families in the arrangements, correspondence with suppliers to be divided by category and confirmed in writing, and no discussion, at any point, of the history between the 2 families. This last rule was proposed by Philippa and accepted by Mr. Ashford without hesitation, which she found on reflection almost suspicious. A man with nothing to conceal did not yield so readily.
Then we are in agreement.
On that point, yes.
She noted the qualification. She chose not to address it. The venue question arose within the first 10 minutes.
Ashford Park.
Mr. Ashford said, setting down his cup.
The ballroom accommodates 200 comfortably. The south lawn has the correct aspect for the outdoor supper, and the kitchens have managed larger events.
He said it as though his mind was already made up on the matter.
Vane House is the traditional venue.
Vane House has not comfortably held more than 150 in living memory. The kitchen garden blocks the south aspect. The kitchens
He paused briefly.
are not designed for the scale of a county ball.
The capacity has never been a difficulty before.
In years, when the subscription was lower and the committee's ambitions were more modest, this year's subscription is the highest on record. Mr. Holt mentioned it at the meeting.
He had, she recalled with some resentment. She had written it down. She looked at the fire for a moment. The proportions of Vane House's ballroom were, she knew, exactly as Mr. Ashford had described. She had measured them herself 2 winters ago, for reasons that currently escaped her. The Ashford Park ballroom was, she also knew, exceptional. She had been told so by 3 separate people on 3 separate occasions, none of whom had any reason to exaggerate.
Ashford Park,
She said.
very well.
He wrote it in his notebook. He had the grace not to look pleased about it, which she supposed was something.
As to the flower arrangements,
He turned a page.
white flowers, simply arranged. No hothouse exotics, nothing that will not survive a warm evening indoors.
White is also what one orders for a burial. I had hoped we might aim for something slightly more festive.
White is practical and appropriate. It will not clash with the clothing of the guests.
I was not aware that men had opinions on flowers, including an aversion to coloured ones. As to the hothouse exotics, flowers have always served, in part, as a reminder of the shortness of life. It would be a philosophical inconsistency to select only the varieties most determined to outlast the evening.
The brevity of life is not in dispute. The question is whether the committee wishes to spend extra monies discovering it at close range. Seasonal flowers are a fraction of the cost of hothouse varieties and last the evening. The cause benefits from the difference.
Hothouse varieties come in every colour. In the interest of economy, since you raise it, I propose equal parts seasonal and hothouse. The cause benefits from the saving. The guests benefit from something worth looking at.
I am persuaded. Coloured flowers and a mix of hothouse and seasonal blooms. The cause will survive the additional expense.
She was not certain afterwards how they had arrived at a compromise. She was fairly certain it had been her idea. She was less certain he had not intended it all along.
I was not aware,
Mr. Ashford said without looking up.
that women had opinions on estate management, until I reviewed your father's accounts in connection with the Caldwell tenancy dispute last autumn.
The room was quiet. Outside, a cart went past on the lane.
The accounts were in order.
Philippa said.
They were.
He agreed. He said nothing further, neither did she. She looked at him for a moment. He looked at his notebook. There was something in the quality of the silence, not hostile exactly, not comfortable either, that she did not have a word for and did not intend to find one. They moved on. There was a great deal still to discuss, and they discussed it. The budget, the orchestra, the question of printed programmes. By 3:30, the folder in Philippa's lap contained 3 pages of notes in her own hand and a list of agreed actions divided between them as precisely as field orders. It was, she thought, remarkably efficient. She was not certain this pleased her. He left at 3:30 precisely. She saw him to the door, as politeness required, and watched the Ashford carriage move down the drive and pass through the gate. The parlour, when she returned to it, felt unexpectedly quiet. The 2 cups on the tray, the fire burning lower, 3 pages of notes in her folder, and Ashford Park written at the top in her own handwriting. She sat down and read through what had been agreed. The venue settled, the budget divided, the flowers to be seasonal and coloured, the meeting with the caterer arranged for Tuesday, the orchestra to be confirmed by Friday. He had been prepared. He had done the arithmetic on the subscription before arriving. He had known the capacity of both ballrooms, hers included, and had not made a show of knowing it. He had made one observation sharper than required about the accounts, and had then moved on without pressing the advantage. She could not fault a single practical point he had raised. It might work, she thought. Not easily, and not without further irritation, but it might work. She had not yet failed at anything she had put her mind to. She saw no reason to begin now, particularly not with Mr. Ashford watching. The carriage home took 20 minutes. Crispin spent the first 5 reviewing his notes and the next 5 thinking about things that were not in them. Vane House was a better house than he had expected. He had anticipated some evidence of the neglect that inevitably accompanied a widower with no son and a daughter who, however capable, was not, quite, the estate's intended heir. He had found no such evidence. The rooms were well kept, the staff efficient, and the parlour had been arranged, he noticed, with more care than the occasion strictly required. Miss Vane had been prepared. More prepared, possibly, than he had been. She had a folder. He had a notebook. She had conceded the venue question in one sentence without visible distress, and had moved on to the next item. He had braced for a longer argument, or for the particular tight-lipped courtesy that functioned as an argument. He had received neither. It had been, if he was truthful, more disconcerting than a refusal would have been. Her observation that she had not been aware men had opinions on flowers had been, he recognized, a challenge, lightly delivered. His remark about estate management had not been planned. She had said something that deserved an answer, and he had given one, and the answer had, incidentally, revealed that he had seen her work and found it without fault. He was aware this was not the behaviour of a man maintaining principled disapproval. He was less certain, on the journey home, that principled disapproval remained the position he held. He was perfectly capable of revising an opinion when the evidence required it. He opened his notebook and wrote a note about the florist. He did not think about the way she had looked at him, in the silence after he mentioned the accounts, before she moved on, the half-second in which she had taken his measure, and he had not been certain, for the first time, what she had found. He was quite certain he did not think about it at all. Chapter 3. Negotiations. The suppliers were all in Marton, the caterer, the florist, and the musicians' hall, and there was no sensible reason to take 2 carriages. Philippa had proposed they share one. Mr. Ashford had agreed, and had opened his notebook before they had even cleared the gate. Marton was 8 miles east along the Wiltshire road, the nearest town of any consequential size, with a high street of useful tradespeople and a pleasing indifference to county gossip. Philippa had her folder. No conversation would be required. She declined to examine how relieved this made her. Outside, the April countryside moved past the window in its usual unhurried way, hedgerows coming into leaf, a field recently turned, a farm cart moving at the pace of the horse that drew it.
There are 3 items on the morning's list,
she said, at the point where Marton's church spire appeared on the horizon.
the caterer, the musicians, and the florist. The catering contract is the most significant. Mr. Holt has given us authority to sign within the approved budget. The musicians are a formality. They were engaged provisionally at the meeting. The florist.
I reviewed the florist's invoice from last year's county ball.
Mr. Ashford interrupted, without looking up from his notebook.
The committee exceeded the approved budget by approximately 15% on the floral arrangements alone. Mrs. Partridge, who was in charge of the flowers, was not pleased to be informed of it.
I was going to say the arrangements may require some negotiation. Mrs. Partridge, I suspect, was not well equipped to resist a very enthusiastic florist.
He looked up then.
Indeed.
He did not apologise for the interruption. Philippa had a brief moment of pity for Mrs. Partridge, who always took such things to heart. She was less certain why Mrs. Partridge had needed to be informed of it at all. The church spire grew larger. The caterer's premises were on Marton's High Street, a prosperous establishment, warm inside, smelling of pastry and something savoury from the back rooms. Mr. Briggs received them with the particular manner of a man who expected his prices to be accepted without discussion, and had arranged the room accordingly. Good chairs, a good fire, a ledger already open to the relevant page, and a plate of samples on the side table with 2 glasses of beer. Mr. Ashford tried one of the samples. Philippa did not touch any of it. She let Mr. Briggs talk. He was experienced at it, building his case before she had a chance to build hers, and she gave him the space to finish. She looked at the figure in the ledger and said nothing. The silence lasted approximately 15 seconds. She had found, over the years, that most people could not sustain a silence of 15 seconds when they were hoping to be told yes. Mr. Ashford, she noticed, did not appear to find the silence awkward at all. Mr. Briggs cleared his throat.
For a long-standing county engagement of this nature, there is always some flexibility.
The subscription this year is the highest on record. We are in a position to offer payment in full, in advance, upon signing. We would also be in a position to mention in the printed programme that the catering has been provided by Mr. Briggs of Marton.
A short discussion produced a revised figure. Mr. Briggs moved on to the question of the menu.
Champagne,
She said when he reached the drinks.
We are at war with France.
Said Mr. Ashford.
We have been at war with France for the better part of 20 years. It has not previously prevented champagne from appearing at county functions.
It has not. Though the subscription committee may find it easier to explain the expenditure if the wine does not come from a country we are currently fighting.
She considered this for a moment.
English sparkling wine, then. There are passable ones.
There are.
He wrote something in his notebook. They accepted the revised figure, signed where indicated, and thanked Mr. Briggs for his time. The shawl she had removed against the warmth was still draped over the chair behind her when she stood to leave. She did not notice it until she was at the door, by which point Mr. Ashford had retrieved it and was holding it out to her without remark.
Thank you,
She said. He said nothing and held the door. Outside on the pavement she did not look at him, and he said nothing about the shawl. The musicians were next. The musician's man produced a list of the dances they could offer. He went through it at some length. At the end of it he added, with the careful neutrality of a man who had learned to gauge his audience,
And a waltz, if required. We have not previously been asked for one at the county ball.
Yes,
said Mr. Ashford.
one ought to have been included years ago.
Philippa looked at him.
It has never been performed at any previous county ball.
No,
He agreed.
Colonel Marsh will object. The elder Miss Caldwell will object more strenuously and at greater length. Mrs. Partridge will ask whether it is appropriate for a charity event.
He paused.
Nobody under 40 will thank us for leaving it out.
She considered this. He was not wrong.
One waltz,
She said.
early in the evening.
2,
He counted.
one early in the evening and the last dance.
The musician's man wrote it down with the expression of someone who intended to be elsewhere should any objections be raised. Philippa lifted an eyebrow but did not object, surprising herself. The florist's shop was at the end of the high street, and it was, there was no other word for it, ambitious. Every surface held something in bloom. Arrangements of varying heights and colours, a display in the window that had achieved a kind of floral extravagance Philippa had not previously encountered outside a state funeral. Mr. Peel, the florist, was a small and energetic man with very strong feelings about the decorative possibilities.
For a county ball,
Mr. Peel said, leading them past a tower of forced roses.
I would suggest something of presence, something that makes a statement.
He indicated with a flourish the centrepiece arrangement. It contained, by her count, 3 varieties of orchids, a quantity of trailing ivy that would have done credit to a medieval great hall, and what appeared to be gilded seed heads.
Very striking,
Philippa said.
Indeed,
Said Mr. Ashford in a tone of complete neutrality. And then, quietly, for her alone,
one would certainly know the flowers were there.
she kept her expression entirely composed, one of the more demanding things she had done all day. The negotiation was conducted efficiently. By the end they had agreed on a mix of hothouse and seasonal flowers, white and coloured, and within the budget, which served as a reasonable excuse to avoid the gaudy gilded centrepiece Mr. Peel had seemed particularly proud of. Her gloves were on the counter. She was at the door when she realised, and had half turned back when she saw that Mr. Ashford had already collected them. He held them out to her without a word. She thanked him. He did not appear to be making a point, which made it, she thought, rather more of a point than if he had. It was 4:30 by the time they emerged from the florist. The light had changed, that particular late afternoon gold that made even the high street look almost picturesque, and the carriage was waiting at the corner. The day had been productive. The contracts were signed, the musicians confirmed, the florist brought to reason. They had worked very well together. She was aware of this, and she was aware that he was aware of it. and the awareness had a quality she did not intend to examine on a public pavement in Marton. She was halfway up the carriage step when she noticed her reticule on it. She had set it down to pull on her gloves and left it there. Mr. Ashford handed it up to her before the footman could move.
"This is becoming a pattern,"
she said, before she could think better of it.
I have not noticed a pattern.
He said it perfectly sincerely. She looked at him for a moment and decided not to pursue the question of whether that was true. They were on the Marton Road, nearly past the last of the town, and the April light was already failing. On the left, a lantern was lit above the Lamb Inn, known in the county for its kitchen, and warm, inviting light glowed in the windows.
"The windows are lit,"
she observed.
So they are.
Said Mr. Ashford. Neither of them moved for a moment.
"There is no point rushing home, as we will not reach it before dark anyhow."
She did not add that she had eaten nothing since breakfast, and had declined, perhaps unwisely, to try any of Mr. Briggs's samples.
That is true,
he agreed, and rapped on the roof to signal the coachman to stop. The Lamb's common room was warm and not empty, and they were not the only travellers stopping for a meal. They were excessively polite about the whole arrangement, about whether they would share a table, of course, it made perfect sense, about the menu, she deferred on the wine, he deferred on the soup, about whether there was any urgency to return, none. The road at dusk was perfectly manageable, but there was no particular reason to hurry. The fire was good, the soup was better than expected. They stayed for an hour and a half. They talked about the ball, and then somehow about something else, and then something else again. She did not afterwards attempt to reconstruct the exact sequence of it. She recalled only that at some point he had said something that made her laugh, genuinely, unexpectedly, and that he had looked at her when she did, briefly, with an expression she added to the small collection of moments she did not yet have words for. She thought about the ball on the drive home, and whether Mr. Ashford would take a partner for either of the waltzes. She thought about it only a little. The drive home took the better part of an hour. The dark required a slower pace, and Crispin spent most of it looking out at the night, because he was the kind of man who did not need to fill a silence even when the silence was his own. The day had been productive. The contracts were signed, the musicians confirmed, the florist brought to terms. He had noted it all. He had also noted, and this required a degree of honesty with himself that he extended only in moving vehicles, that Miss Vane had negotiated a catering contract approximately 12% below the opening figure using a method he had not previously witnessed in 2 decades of estate management. She had simply not spoken, had looked at the number and waited, and the caterer had revised his position without a word of argument being required. It was, he thought, one of the more elegant things he had seen all year. He was finding it more difficult than expected to name what, precisely, he had seen, which was itself a kind of information. Miss Vane was not, by any observable measure, a disorganized woman. The folder was meticulous. The day's schedule had been adhered to without a wasted quarter hour. She had known the florist's invoice figures without consulting her notes. At no point had she misplaced her pen, her list, or her schedule. He had no satisfactory explanation for the shawl, or the gloves, or the reticule. Everything belonging to the day's business had been perfectly maintained. Everything belonging to herself, apparently, required retrieval. For the gloves, he had a hypothesis, which he declined to examine and filed beside a number of other things he had chosen not to examine today. She had made him laugh, somewhere over the soup, something she had said about the musician's man and the country dances. The laughter had surprised him. Not the wit, which was precise and well aimed, but the fact that he had not seen it coming. He had prepared himself for competence and braced for composure. He had not made adequate provision for the possibility that she was also, in some quiet and unhurried way, very funny. He opened his notebook, read back through the day's notes, and added, "Printer, Tuesday." Then he closed it. He did not think about the way she had laughed, without warning, caught briefly off guard by it herself. or about any of the rest of the mysteries of Miss Philippa Vane. He was quite certain he did not think about it at all. Chapter 4. Family Matters. Sir George Vane had the particular quality of a man who wished to be helpful, but had not decided what, precisely, to be helpful about. He had heard the report of the Martin visit, the contracts signed, the musicians confirmed, the florist successfully managed, and had said that it all sounded very satisfactory, which it was. He had also said that he trusted her judgment entirely, which he did, and then fallen quiet for slightly longer than usual, which he rarely was. Philippa waited and did not help him.
Mr. Ashford,
He said at last. Not a question,
He was professionally useful.
Philippa said.
We are in agreement on all the significant decisions.
yes,
Said Sir George.
I expect you are.
He looked at his port for a moment.
Your mother would have found something to say about it.
This was almost certainly true. Her mother had maintained the feud with considerably more conviction than Sir George, and would have found the present arrangement deeply unsatisfactory. Philippa had been 16 when she died, which was old enough to be quite certain of this.
The ball will be very good.
She said,
I'm sure it will.
said Sir George warmly, and then, with the particular care of a man trying to say something and finding he did not quite have the words for it.
I am glad it is going well.
She understood him. She did not press the subject. They talked about the lambing instead. Mrs. Dora Finch, Philippa's closest friend since the age of 12, and the one person in the county to whom she could say exactly what she thought, called 3 days after the Martin visit, in the manner of a woman who had been waiting exactly long enough to appear casual about it.
Well,
Said Dora, settling into the best chair with the ease of someone who had been settling into that chair for many years.
your note was very evasive. Now tell me everything.
The suppliers are all confirmed.
Philippa said.
The budget is within the approved limits. The florist required some management, but we arrived at a satisfactory arrangement.
Dora looked at her.
That is not what I asked.
It is what there is to report.
Philippa,
Dora accepted her tea and looked at her and said nothing for a long time, which was, Philippa recognised, her own approach, turned back on her with considerable accuracy.
you spent the better part of a day in a carriage and across 3 establishments with Mr. Crispin Ashford, and then you stopped for dinner at the Lamb. I know all about it. Mrs. Holt mentioned it to Mrs. Carey, who mentioned it to me. At this rate, the entire county will know about it before Thursday.
Philippa set down her cup with rather more precision than the action required.
We stopped because the light was failing. It was a practical decision.
Of course,
Said Dora pleasantly.
though I understand you drove home in the dark regardless.
She paused.
How was the meal?
Philippa did not attempt to answer that.
Better than expected, actually. The duck was delicious. I really must get that recipe for the port sauce. How is your new cook settling in?
She asked in an ineffective attempt to steer the conversation into gentler waters. Dora looked at her with the expression of a woman who was not going to say what she was thinking, because she did not need to. Philippa had known Dora Finch for 20 years and was well acquainted with this expression. She found it at present somewhat trying.
He was professionally useful,
Philippa said.
We are in agreement on all the significant decisions. The ball will be very well organised.
I'm sure it will.
Said Dora.
And how was he in a non-professional capacity?
There was a brief pause.
Professionally useful.
Dora smiled into her tea.
Is there anything else I should know?
Philippa did her best to put a bland expression on her face.
No, not really, except that there will be 2 waltzes at the ball this year at Mr. Ashford's request.
2.
Doris stared in amazement.
And do you intend to dance either of them?
My waltzing days are long behind me. I'm sure no one will be interested in leading a spinster around the room.
Dora did not look convinced.
As usual, you underrate your charms, Philippa. I'm sure Mr. Warrington would be happy to waltz with you.
She proceeded to name, in rapid succession, 3 further former admirers.
Well, it will all come to nothing, as I will be far too busy overseeing the arrangements on the night,
Oh, I'm sure you could make time for a waltz if the right gentleman asked,
said Dora. She had that maddening smile on her face again, but did not pursue the matter further, which was, Philippa thought, in some ways considerably worse than if she had.
How is your family taking the news of our collaboration?
Crispin asked at their next working session, once Mr. Holt had gone home.
Very supportively,
Said Philippa. He looked at her for a moment with a doubtful expression. He had the quality, she had noticed, of a man who did not require the unstated to be stated.
My mother has also been particularly supportive.
Philippa understood him completely. She did not press the subject.
We have also come to the attention of the Three Bells.
The Three Bells was the local inn, where, as far as Philippa could tell, the chief occupation between market days was speculation about one's neighbours. This gave him pause.
In what capacity?
There are bets being laid as to whether the ball will take place at all.
She delivered this news as she would any other piece of administrative information.
The current odds, I understand, favour completion, but narrowly.
He was quiet for a moment.
The county is betting on whether we will manage to get through 8 weeks of working together without abandoning a charity ball.
Yes.
A charity ball.
Yes. The terms are apparently somewhat specific,
She added.
The primary wager is on the balls taking place. There is a secondary bet on whether either of us will be seen to smile at the other at the ball itself if it takes place.
He was quiet for a moment longer than usual.
The county has too much time on its hands.
It is April. Nothing of significance has happened since the lambing.
A brief pause. Something crossed his face that she could not immediately name. Not quite amusement, not quite outrage, somewhere between the two. She suspected she felt much the same.
The programme,
He said, and opened his notebook.
we should finalise the running order.
The tombola first. We need to confirm the donated lots before we can set the interval timing. There is also the patroness ribbon.
He looked at her.
The patroness ribbon.
You have not attended in some years,
She said. It was not a question.
The estate required my attention.
Of course.
A brief pause.
It is awarded each year to the wife of whichever subscriber has contributed most generously to the donated lots.
And who is that generally?
Mrs. Alderton. It has been Mrs. Alderton for 6 consecutive years.
He considered this.
Is she a particularly generous woman?
Her husband is. She receives the ribbon with great surprise every year.
Philippa added.
It is one of the more reliable features of the evening, along with the watercolour competition, in which ladies submit a piece for the committee to judge.
And who wins that?
Philippa paused.
Mrs. Alderton.
Is she a talented watercolourist?
The committee,
Said Philippa carefully.
has always found something to admire in her submissions.
His mother had called on a Wednesday, 2 days before the working session, and had been, as she always was, perfectly composed and entirely impossible to deal with.
I understand the Martin visit went well.
She said, in the tone of a woman who understood rather more than the sentence contained.
The contracts are signed.
Crispin said.
The suppliers are all confirmed.
Miss Vane seems very capable.
His mother said. This was delivered as simple observation, though his mother never delivered simple observations.
I have heard good things about her management of the Vane estate. Apparently she has a considerable gift for negotiation.
She does.
He said. He did not elaborate.
And she is pleasant to work with?
His mother's tone was precisely calibrated, genuinely interested, her question innocuous enough to make it impossible to object to, and asking something else entirely.
We are in agreement on the significant decisions.
His mother nodded, with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had received an answer without appearing to seek one.
I am so glad it is going well. Miss Vane is very capable by all accounts, though I understand the Vane family can be particular in their dealings. I am sure you are keeping proper account of how decisions are being made.
Of course.
And you are comfortable with the arrangement? These collaborations can become complicated when there is family history in the background. It would be most unfortunate should one become attached without quite meaning to. I mention it only because these things are so much easier to manage early.
I'm always glad of your advice,
he said stiffly. She stayed for 40 minutes, drank 2 cups of tea, asked 4 further questions about the ball arrangements, and said nothing more about Miss Vane. She did not need to. By the time she left, Crispin had the clear impression that he had been warned about Miss Vane specifically, about the Vane family in general, and in terms precise enough to be unmistakable, but vague enough to be unanswerable. At the door, she had added,
It is so pleasant when people rise to their circumstances.
He had been turning this over at intervals since Wednesday, and had not yet established whether it was a compliment, an observation, or instructions. The drive home from the working session took 20 minutes. Crispin spent the first 10 thinking about the 3 bells, and the second 10 thinking about his mother, because these were both considerably safer objects of attention than the third thing, which he declined to name. He was entirely clear on what the purpose of his mother's visit had been. He found, somewhat to his irritation, that this had not made it easier to dismiss. He was at least grateful that she had not raised the subject of Miss Hartley. His mother had been of the view for some time that Miss Hartley would suit him very well. He had not, on the whole, disagreed, which was not, he was aware, quite the same as agreeing. The county apparently considered the ball's completion uncertain enough to wager on. He found this, on reflection, more motivating than it had any right to be. Perhaps he should place a bet himself, anonymously. He opened his notebook to draft the order of the dances, and suddenly wondered what Miss Vane would do if he asked her to dance. He resolved once and for all to put Miss Vane out of his mind, except in a professional capacity. Chapter 5. The Inspection. Ashford Park was not as she had last seen it. She had been there once, years ago, at some long-forgotten county occasion, when the estate had still been in the latter stages of the elder Mr. Ashford's mismanagement. She had come away with an impression of peeling plasterwork, overgrown gravel, and the particular atmosphere of a house that had been managing on reduced circumstances and knew it. What she found now was orderly, well-maintained, and, in several respects, quietly impressive. She did not record any of this in her expression. Crispin showed her through the principal rooms himself. He did not say much. He was not, she had learned, a man who narrated unnecessarily. But there was something in the way he moved through the house that she noticed. The slight pause at the restored plasterwork in the entrance hall. The way he opened the ballroom doors slowly rather than simply pushing them. The ballroom was on the south side of the house, with windows along the full length of one wall and a floor that had been recently polished. Philippa walked its dimensions, checked the aspect of the light, and assessed the distance from the kitchen passage with the air of a woman doing arithmetic.
The acoustics are good,
she said.
I had the panelling restored 3 years ago,
Crispin said.
It makes a difference.
It did. She did not say so. The kitchen quarters were well organised, the larder properly ventilated, and the arrangement of the service passage efficient in a way that would simplify the supper considerably. The grounds, visible from the upper windows as they passed through, were better than she had any right to expect. The formal garden trim, the parkland beyond it, open and well kept, the whole giving the impression of a property that had been restored by someone who knew what they were doing and had applied themselves to it methodically. She was aware, as they moved from room to room, that she was revising a number of assumptions. She was not certain how she felt about this. The inspection concluded sooner than expected. As there was no particular urgency to leave, and Crispin was eager to show off more of the house, they found themselves, by no particular design, in the library. It was a good library, 2 stories, south-facing, with a gallery running around the upper level and the kind of deep-set window seats that indicated someone had once intended to spend serious time here. Philippa's eye moved along the shelves with the involuntary attention of a person who could not enter a room full of books without cataloguing it. Then she stopped. On the spine of a volume, small but unmistakable, the Vane coat of arms. There were several others beside it. She took it down and opened it. Inside the cover, in a hand she did not recognize, 2 words in faded ink, with friendship.
"These are Vane books,"
she said. Crispin had come to stand beside her.
A number of them, yes. There are 14, I think, perhaps 15. They passed to my grandfather's collection before I was born.
He paused.
Families who were on close terms shared books in those days.
She understood what he was not quite saying. The feud was 30 years old. These books were older. There had been a time, before whatever had happened between their families, when a Vane ancestor had inscribed a book for an Ashford with real feeling.
"They should be returned,"
she said, more sharply than she intended.
If you like. Though I think Sir Edmund gave them freely.
She was about to say that the circumstances had since changed, when he spoke again.
I wonder sometimes,
he said in the tone of a man raising a subject carefully,
whether the full account of what happened between our families is quite as settled as both sides believe it to be.
Philippa turned to look at him.
"I beg your pardon?"
I mean only that these things tend to have more than one version, and that the versions rarely agree.
"The version I am familiar with,"
she said with some precision,
"is based on direct family testimony."
As is mine.
He met her gaze without difficulty.
Which is precisely what I mean.
There was a pause. It was the closest they had come to touching on the heart of the disagreement between their families. Her remark had not been kind, but he had not taken the bait. She noted, without comment, that there was a volume of Cowper on the nearest shelf with a Vane bookplate. She did not take it down, nor did she mention anything else about taking the books. They reviewed the ball arrangements in the morning room over tea, the supper menu, the catering requirements, the linen count, how many covers the kitchen could manage without additional staff. Philippa had brought her own notes. He had prepared a summary of what the house could provide. They agreed on 6 points and deferred 2. It was, she thought, very nearly pleasant.
"There has been a development at the Three Bells,"
she said as they were concluding.
Oh.
"An anonymous wager has been placed. On completion."
She looked at the ledger.
"A fairly confident one, by all accounts."
Is that so?
"The odds have shifted. The county is apparently revising its assessment of our prospects."
He said nothing. He reached for his tea.
"I find it encouraging, whoever it was."
Quite.
She looked at him for a moment. He looked back at her with an expression of complete composure. She returned to the ledger. He walked her to her carriage. He stood in the drive until it was out of sight, which was not something he had particularly intended to do. He went back inside. He did not go to the morning room or to his study. He went by no very direct route to the library. On the table by the window, where she had set it down to open the book, was a small silver pencil case. Monogrammed. He picked it up, P.V., engraved in a neat script. She had left it behind. Miss Vane, who had arrived with her own notes, her own agenda, and a comprehensive list of deficiencies, had walked out of his library without her pencil case. He set it on the mantelpiece, to be returned at the next working session. He did not examine what it meant that she had forgotten it. He had not intended to say what he had said about the feud. He had intended, specifically, not to say it. He had a view on the subject that he had held for some years and had not found occasion to raise with anyone, and he had arrived in the library with every intention of keeping it to himself for the foreseeable future. The book plates had been something of an ambush. She had bristled, as he had expected. What he had not expected was that she had not pursued it, that she had gone very still in the way she went still when she was thinking rather than reacting, and had said nothing, and had left the room with the air of a woman filing something away for later examination rather than dismissing it. He was not certain what to make of that. He was fairly certain it meant something. There was also the matter of the anonymous wager. He had arranged for it to be placed by a cousin of his head groom, someone with no obvious connection to Ashford Park. This had seemed at the time a satisfactory solution. He had since concluded that placing a notably large bet on a local charity ball in a village where notable bets were remarked upon had perhaps not been his most considered decision. He had noted her tone when she mentioned it. He had noted, further, that she had called it encouraging. He took down the volume of Cowper she had not taken down. He opened it. The bookplate was there, small and precise, with the Vane arms. Inside, in the same faded hand, with friendship. He stood with it for a moment. He had known the books were there, had known for years, had catalogued them himself when he first took stock of the library after his father's death. He had not, until today, thought carefully about what it meant that they were there at all. Two families who had not spoken properly in 30 years, and yet here was the evidence that they had once been close enough to share a library, close enough to write with friendship and mean it. He thought about what she had said. They should be returned. She had not meant it kindly. He had heard the sharpness in it, the reflexive claim, the instinct to draw a line. But she had also, he noticed, not repeated it. She had looked at the books and gone quiet, and left without pressing the matter. He had a theory about Miss Vane, which he had been developing for some weeks, and had not shared with anyone. It was that she was considerably more uncertain about the feud than she appeared. That the certainty she displayed was the kind that required maintenance, the kind that did not sit easily if you examined it too directly. He could not prove this, but the way she had looked at the inscription, before she composed herself, had not been the look of a woman who was entirely comfortable with what she believed. He put the Cowper back. It belonged where it was. Sir Edmund had given it freely, and whatever had happened afterwards, the gift did not become ungiven. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Vane bookplates." He looked at it for a moment. There was, he reflected, nothing useful to add. He closed the notebook. He did not think about the way she had looked at him when he had said what he said. He thought about it for some considerable time. Chapter 6. The Committee Dinner. Mr. Holt's vicarage dining room seated 12 with comfort and 14 with optimism. He had invited 16 and arranged the table accordingly. The local great and good had obliged. Colonel and Mrs. Marsh, the 3 Miss Lovelaces, Mr. Oswald Price and his wife, Mrs. Dorothy Ashwell with her nephew, and several others whose names Philippa had not yet fixed, and, arriving just as Philippa was removing her wrap, Miss Arabella Wyndham, who was fair-haired, young, possessed of an income of 4,000 a year, and who looked, the moment she entered the room and caught sight of Mr. Ashford near the fire, as though she had received precisely the opportunity she had been hoping for. Philippa noted this. It was information. She declined to examine it further. Mr. Holt greeted them a shade too enthusiastically.
Miss Vane and Mr. Ashford. Capital.
He paused, clearly having intended to say something else and thought better of it. He had been briefed on the situation, she gathered. He had the air of a man who had spent the preceding fortnight in private anxiety, but seemed determined to rise above it.
Now then, Colonel Marsh has questions about the catering.
The pasties,
Philippa said to Mr. Ashford under her breath.
just as I warned you about.
Ah,
Mr. Ashford said.
the pasties.
Colonel Marsh's wife had an uncle who manufactured them in considerable quantities and promoted them at every available opportunity on any event at which food was required. They were not good pasties. No doubt this would be the first of many times this evening where they would be forced to defend their decisions. Philippa straightened her shoulders, and Mr. Ashford stood a little taller, if that was possible. This had been anticipated, and they had agreed to put on a show of unity. The onslaught began before the first course was served. Colonel Marsh, who had never, in 30 years of attending the Midsummer Ball, found any reason to change anything, and had arrived with questions about the venue, the access, the kitchens, the grounds, and whether Ashford Park could be expected to manage what had always been perfectly well managed elsewhere, directed the dinner from his end with the air of a man conducting a military exercise. Philippa and Mr. Ashford were seated, by accident or Mr. Holt's design, opposite each other at the table's centre. This made them simultaneously the easiest people to address and the most conspicuous pair in the room. Miss Wyndham had been placed at the far end of the table. Philippa noted, without particular interest, that she had glanced in Mr. Ashford's direction 3 times during the first course alone, and that the distance between them appeared to cause her some private disappointment. Mr. Holt kept a good cellar and a cook who understood the difference between food that was hot and food that was merely warm. The candles were well placed.
Now, the supper arrangements.
Colonel Marsh set down his glass.
Ashford Park is to host this year, I understand. And I will say plainly, the kitchens there have not, to my knowledge, been used for an event of this scale. I have concerns about the capacity.
The kitchen quarters can accommodate 300 covers without additional staff, Colonel,
Philippa said.
The service passage runs the full length of the east wing.
I had the range updated in 12.
Mr. Ashford added.
It handles high-volume service without difficulty.
A small pause. Colonel Marsh looked from one to the other with the expression of a man who had prepared considerably more objections than this exchange had required.
And the orchestra? Where do you propose?
Mr. Price ventured.
The ballroom has a raised platform at the north end.
Mr. Ashford said.
Designed for the purpose.
It faces south,
Philippa continued.
The acoustics carry the music the full length without echo.
Philippa had not come to the dinner unprepared. Every question the committee was likely to raise about the new venue, every figure she might be called upon to provide, she had at hand. She had not brought her notes to the table. She had not needed to.
You've been very thorough,
Mr. Price said.
We try,
Philippa said. This was not something she had planned to say. It had simply arrived, in the plural, as though it were the most natural thing to say. She was aware that Mr. Ashford had glanced up. She did not meet his eye. Mr. Ashford, seated opposite, had a face that did not assemble itself into conventional good looks. His nose had been broken at some point and set with rather more character than precision. His jaw was heavier than was strictly necessary. She had observed this before, in daylight, and found it unproblematic. In candlelight, she found, it was somewhat less unproblematic than she would have preferred. He had a sort of unaffected masculinity, she thought, that perhaps some women would find very appealing. She returned her attention to the table.
And I understand,
Colonel Marsh said, with the air of a man who had been waiting all evening for this moment,
that there is to be a waltz.
2.
Mr. Ashford said.
2 waltzes at a charity ball.
At the far end of the table, the 3 Miss Lovelaces gasped, not quite in unison, but within a beat of each other, which suggested long practice. The eldest pressed a hand to her chest. The youngest Miss Lovelace, who was 65 and had therefore had 3 years to reconcile herself to the existence of the waltz, appeared to have not managed it.
The last Midsummer Ball raised £43,
Philippa said.
The county average for comparable events is 68. The programme has not previously included a waltz.
1 early in the evening.
Mr. Ashford continued.
and one to close. If it is good enough for Almack's, it is certainly good enough for our ball.
He looked severely at Colonel Marsh, making it clear that the matter was not open for discussion. Colonel Marsh looked as though he had several further observations prepared. Mrs. Marsh beside him touched his arm. He reached for his wine instead and said no more about the waltzes. Mrs. Ashwell, who had been watching proceedings from the upper end of the table with the attention of a woman who had survived 40 years of county society and was therefore not easily satisfied, set down her glass and looked at them directly.
"Tell me," she said, "what you propose to do about Mrs. Beresford's pugs."
A small silence ensued. The Beresfords attended the Midsummer Ball without fail. The difficulty was that Mrs. Beresford, who was the matron of the family and accustomed to being indulged, brought her pugs. There were 4 of them. They were not well behaved. The committee had discussed the matter every year for as long as anyone could remember. The pugs arrived every year regardless. Mr. Ashford said nothing for a moment. He had the expression of a man who had just imagined something he wished he hadn't.
They were in the East Parlour in 13,
Philippa said.
They ate a curtain.
Mr. Ashford closed his eyes briefly.
I have new curtains.
We could assign a footman to manage them,
she said.
Keep them to one corner of the room.
Mrs. Beresford will not permit them out of her sight.
No,
Philippa agreed. A pause.
The Beresfords contribute £40 a year.
Mr. Ashford looked resigned.
Yes.
Then we accept the pugs,
Philippa said. Colonel Marsh, who had drawn breath to say something more about the pugs, let it go. Somewhere between the removes, the table had shifted in its attention. There was no single moment she could have pointed to, but the quality of it had changed. The conversation turned to more general things. Mrs. Marsh leaned towards her husband and said something inaudible. Mr. Holt smiled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the candles. Even the Miss Lovelaces, occupied with their own conversation at the far end, seemed to relax. The dinner, it appeared, was going rather well. The evening continued in this fashion. Where Philippa was not quite in possession of a detail, Mr. Ashford was. Where one deflected, the other followed. Not quite echoing, but completing. Mr. Holt was visibly delighted. Colonel Marsh, having exhausted his questions more quickly than anticipated, turned to his wine with the air of a man who had been outmanoeuvred and could not quite explain how. Philippa gave Mr. Ashford a small, private look of congratulation. He returned it with a very slight nod and the smallest of smiles. Philippa cut a piece of fish she was not tasting and thought,
We have not rehearsed this.
It was more unnerving than she would have expected. She was not a woman who found coordination troubling. She found it efficient. What disturbed her was that it had happened without coordination at all. That all evening, the spaces between their answers had been exactly the right size. The gentlemen did not linger over port. Mr. Holt had charades arranged in the drawing-room. They required full attendance, and his cheerful insistence on this left no option for refusals. The drawing-room was warm and candle-lit. The committee guests distributed themselves with the practised ease of people who did this every season. Miss Arabella Wyndham had arranged herself near the windows with the particular attention to chair placement that suggested forethought. When Mr. Ashford re-entered the room, she adjusted her position slightly, not dramatically, not in any way one could remark upon, but in a way that Philippa, who was paying no particular attention, remarked upon. Miss Wyndham spoke to him directly. She offered some observation about the evening, delivered with the ease of a young woman who had prepared for exactly this opportunity. Mr. Ashford answered. He was perfectly courteous. He then noticed that Colonel Marsh had a further question about the orchestra platform, and crossed the room to address it, and stood with his back to the window for the better part of 20 minutes. Miss Wyndham waited a reasonable interval for his return. Then she joined the Miss Lovelaces with a sour look. Philippa noted this with no particular feeling, and then noted, with rather more, that she had noted it at all. The carriages were called at 9:30. The hall produced a pleasant confusion of cloaks and candles and farewells. Mr. Holt pressed every hand with the enthusiasm of a man who found leave-taking as satisfying as arrival. Philippa and Mr. Ashford were last. Each had instructed their carriage to return at a later hour, having expected the evening to run long. Neither had mentioned this to the other. They waited in the forecourt while the marsh coach completed its turn. The night was clear and cold, the lantern above the vicarage door casting them both in amber light.
"We were rather good together this evening,"
Mr. Ashford said, with a smile that Philippa was certain would have melted the heart of most young ladies.
I am confident that the ball will be a great success.
"That is not what I meant."
A pause. Somewhere down the lane, a horse shifted against the traces. She had turned to go when he said,
"Miss Vane."
She turned back. He held out the pencil case, small, silver, monogrammed, the one she had left at Ashford Park.
"You left this."
She looked at it for a moment. Then she took it.
Thank you.
He helped her in. Philippa made herself not look back and occupied herself with the arrangement of her travelling rug until the vicarage lantern had passed behind the hedge and there was nothing left to look at anyway. The road from Holt's vicarage to Ashford Park was 3 miles. Crispin had taken it 100 times and could not tonight have given an accurate account of it. Miss Wyndham had been at the dinner. He retained a general impression of fair hair and something to do with the window. He had, he now understood, said nothing of substance to her all evening, contributed nothing to any conversation she had attempted, and at some point spoken directly across her to address Colonel Marsh's question about the orchestra platform. This had not been deliberate. It had, however, been intentional. He had been entirely occupied. He had spent the evening watching Miss Vane deflect Colonel Marsh's questions with exact, unhurried specificity, and had found himself expanding upon her answers, not because he had planned to, but because the next detail was there and it fit. And then she had said,
"We try."
And that, in retrospect, was the moment he had abandoned any attempt at the dinner as a social occasion and simply found, with some surprise, that he had not wanted the evening to end. He found, with mild irritation, that he could remember her appearance that evening with uncomfortable exactness. The chestnut hair put up with that characteristic severity, the grey-green eyes that had a way of arriving at a thing and already knowing it. He had not intended to be so thorough in his observations. The thoroughness appeared to have happened anyhow. His thoughts turned to her departure. He had said it was not what he meant. She had known it was not what he meant. He was entirely confident of this. She had nonetheless addressed a different point with crisp efficiency, and then her carriage had arrived at a convenient moment, and she had not deigned to linger. He was not certain this had been a coincidence. He had carried it in his coat pocket all evening, waiting for the right moment to return it. He wondered if he should have done so earlier. She had seemed shocked, which was not the reaction he had hoped for. The lamp on her carriage stayed visible until it disappeared behind the hedge. He had not intended to watch it that long. At several points he had been about to look away, and at each of them failed to. The notebook came out of his pocket. He held it for a moment, then put it away again, and let his thoughts drift back instead to the easy way they had worked together at the dinner. He thought,
"We did not rehearse this."
The dark outside offered nothing. He thought about nothing else the rest of the way home. Chapter 7. The Crisis. June 1815. The letter arrived at Philippa's breakfast table at 7:30 and ruined her first cherished cup of tea of the day. Mr. Briggs, the caterer engaged for the Midsummer Ball, wrote to inform the committee that flooding had rendered his premises entirely inoperable. He regretted the inconvenience and enclosed a banker's draft for the deposit. The ball was in a fortnight. By 9 o'clock, Philippa had ridden to Ashford Park. Mr. Ashford, she was informed by his butler, was in the breakfast room. She was shown in before she had quite decided whether this was appropriate. He was still in his shirt sleeves, his coffee unfinished, and looked up from his correspondence with the expression of a man who had not expected the day to begin so abruptly.
"The caterer has flooded,"
she said, and placed the letter on the table in front of him. He read it, set it down, and reached for his coffee.
Sit down. Hodges, another cup.
She sat. She had brought her notebook. She opened it to the relevant page and set it in front of him.
3 options, as I see it. The Fenwick's cook managed the harvest supper last October. 60 covers, generally well received. There is also a new establishment on the Marton High Street. The proprietor trained in London and is said to offer French-style cookery. And there is a Mrs. Cotter in Upton Beer.
Mrs. Cotter. I have eaten her food. It was good.
Then I think we have a plan.
He looked at her for a moment. She had arrived at his house at 9 in the morning on horseback. He finished his coffee, said nothing, and went to change. They were mounted by 9:30. Their plan consisted of 3 destinations: the Fenwick estate, the village of Upton Beer, where Mrs. Cotter had the local reputation of a woman who could produce food for 100 and consider it a quiet afternoon, and the new establishment on Marton High Street, which had not yet had the opportunity to disappoint anyone. The day was warm and a little muddy underfoot. Philippa's mare, who was 10 years old and firm in her opinions, declined to be hurried past standing water.
"She does not like puddles,"
Philippa said, as the mare stopped for the 3rd time.
I had observed this,
Mr. Ashford said, from the opposite verge, where his own horse stood with the self-possession of an animal that had been asked to do considerably more demanding things. The Fenwick cook was agreeable, with some persuasion and the promise of additional payment for the shorter notice. The Marton establishment was the surprise of the morning. Its proprietor, a brisk young man who had spent years in professional kitchens in London, produced a menu and a figure that came in under budget. Mr. Ashford negotiated the terms, while Philippa revised the numbers at the corner table. At one point, the proprietor said something that made Mr. Ashford laugh. She kept her attention on the figures, which was where it belonged. Mrs. Cotter, reached by early afternoon, informed them with perfect composure that she was already engaged for a wedding and could not oblige, a fact she communicated with such serenity that it was difficult to feel she considered this anyone's loss but theirs. The question of which caterer to engage occupied the next 3 miles in earnest. Mr. Ashford favoured Fenwick, known work, reliable, no risk. Philippa favoured Marton, better value, and the French-style menu suited a ball rather than a harvest supper, which was the Fenwick cook's particular strength. Philippa won. She did not remark on it. He was glad of this. On the long downhill stretch, where the horses found their own pace, he said something very dry about Colonel Marsh's probable opinion of French-style cookery, something that connected, with precision, to the argument they had just been having, and Philippa laughed properly before she could stop herself. He did not remark on it. She was glad of this. They were on the Upton Bear Road when Mr. Price, encountered by chance, expressed his condolences on the matter of the flooded caterer and suggested with some delicacy that in a genuine emergency, Colonel Marsh's wife's uncle had a standing offer, which Philippa and Mr. Ashford declined before he had quite finished the sentence. Mr. Price looked from one to the other.
"Quite,"
he said, and rode on. A short silence followed.
The pasties.
Mr. Ashford said.
"The pasties,"
Philippa agreed with a mock shudder. The argument about the seating plan had begun somewhere on the Upton Bear Common, and had not been resolved to either party's satisfaction. The specific matter at issue was whether Colonel Marsh should be placed near the orchestra, where his objections could be anticipated and managed, or far from it, where they could not.
"Near,"
Philippa said.
"Contained proximity. We know what he will say."
Far.
Mr. Ashford said.
He cannot object at length to what he cannot hear clearly.
He objected at considerable length to the catering arrangements at the committee dinner, and he was not within 20 feet of a kitchen.
That is a different category of objection.
She looked at him. He appeared to mean this seriously.
"Near,"
she said, as though the matter were settled.
I have not agreed.
She considered this.
Far,
she said.
Far.
He agreed. It was, he thought, the correct answer. He did not say so.
You may as well stay for dinner,
he said at the Ashford Park gate when she had turned her horse towards home.
It is past 6 and we have not yet reviewed the revised budget.
She ought to have declined. She did not decline. Hodges, evidently unsurprised, produced dinner with the quiet efficiency of a household accustomed to unexpected guests. Her boots were muddy, and there was a smear of something unidentified on her left glove, and she found she could not bring herself to care. The revised budget was reviewed, amended in 2 places, and set aside.
Your father,
he said, when the covers had been removed and more wine brought.
How is he?
She looked up.
Somewhat improved. His physician is cautiously optimistic, which means he does not know but will not say so.
That is generally what cautiously optimistic means.
Yes. I have had some months to arrive at that conclusion.
He said nothing further on the subject. She found, unexpectedly, that she was grateful for this, that he did not press or offer reassurance he could not mean, or redirect the conversation with the particular restlessness of a person made uncomfortable by illness. He simply nodded and refilled her glass, and let the silence be what it was.
You have been managing it all, the estate as well as your father.
She glanced at him.
How did you know that?
One hears things,
he said, without particular emphasis.
You have been bearing a great deal and doing it well. That is not nothing.
Her eyes suddenly filled and she had to look away. Later, she was not certain how it began, they were discussing Walter Scott's Guy Mannering, which had been out since February and which they had both, it emerged, already read.
His opinion of Meg Merrilies is that she strains credibility.
She does strain credibility. She is a prophetess who lives in a ruin and is invariably correct.
That is what makes her interesting.
I did not say she was not interesting. I said she strains credibility. These are not the same objection.
She considered this.
The second volume loses the thread in the middle.
Agreed.
You said your opinion of the second volume was that it was the stronger of the 2.
I said the resolution was stronger. The middle is a known deficiency.
He looked entirely untroubled by this distinction.
That is not what you said.
It is what I meant.
She found, with some irritation, that she could not refute this. He had a habit of being right about things in a way that left no obvious purchase for argument. The fire burned down, the wine diminished. She had not talked about a book in this way in some time. She had not, she thought, talked in this way at all in some time. It was past 7 when she stood to go.
Thank you for dinner.
Thank you for resolving the catering crisis.
We resolved it.
There was something in his expression she chose not to examine closely.
It is 7:30 and nearly dark. Take my carriage. I will have someone bring your horse over in the morning.
She found she did not object. He walked her to the carriage himself and stood watching until it had turned out of the gate. The drawing room was quiet without her. Crispin had not particularly expected to notice this. He had come back inside and found himself standing at the window, though the lane had bent 50 yards past the gate and there was nothing left to see. She had not looked back. He had not expected her to. She was not, he was learning, a person who looked back. He went to the library, took down Guy Mannering, stood holding it for a moment, and put it back. He thought about the way she had arrived this morning, the crisis treated as a problem to solve rather than a disaster to endure. He thought about we resolved it, not a correction exactly, but precision. It had been both of them. She was not a woman to assign credit she did not consider accurate. He thought about her father. She had delivered the news of his illness without self-pity, which he suspected was harder than it sounded. She had looked up, just briefly, when he had mentioned it, not startled. something else, as though she had not expected anyone to notice. He refilled his glass, sat by the fire, and did not pick up a book. She had disagreed with him about the second volume. She had been, in 2 of her 3 objections, correct. He found he did not particularly mind this. Miss Hartwell, he reflected, would have agreed with everything he said about the book, and he would have found it insufferable. He found, upon reflection, that there were a number of things about Miss Vane that he had expected to mind, and did not. He looked at the fire for some time. He had almost said something when she was leaving. He had stopped himself. The thing he had almost said was true, and he had learned, over some years, that true things spoken aloud had a way of becoming permanent, of settling into a room and refusing to leave. The arrangement between them was working. He was not certain he wanted to alter it. Chapter 8. The Truth Surfaces. June, 1815. The letter from his Aunt Caroline arrived on a Tuesday. It came at the usual pace of Caroline's correspondence, 3 weeks after his own, and bearing the marks of several attempts, with additions crowding the margins in smaller and smaller writing. He had written to her in some general way about the summer, the ball, the committee, the peculiar circumstance of working alongside Miss Vane. He had not expected much in return. Caroline's letters tended to run to gardens, weather, and the opinions of her Shropshire neighbours on matters of local interest. He read the first 3 pages in that spirit. Then he reached the 4th.
And you mention Miss Philippa Vane, who must be George's daughter. I do so hope this means the Vanes and the Ashfords are getting along at last. The whole unpleasant business was quite unnecessary in my view, and I should have said so at the time if anyone had thought to ask me. I was very fond of George. I simply was not going to marry him, which I told him quite clearly before any of it came to a head, because by then I had met Etienne. My father had rather fixed ideas about suitable matches. There are things one understands at 19 that are very difficult to explain to one's father. I suppose I assumed the families would settle it eventually. Etienne and I were so completely happy that it was difficult to believe anyone would remain unhappy for very long. He was from France, which I believe my family considered a mark against him, though I never understood why he should be objectionable. He was a dancing master by profession, which I suspect my father found equally troubling, but he was a wonderful dancer. He died in the spring of 1811, peacefully and at home, and I miss him very much, but I would not have had things otherwise. 30 years of a good marriage is not nothing. Do give my warmest regards to Sir George when you encounter him. Tell Miss Vane her father was a very good sort of young man.
He put the letter down. He read the passage again. The Ashford account of the matter had been consistent for 30 years. That the Vane family had made plain, through tone, through distance, through the careful withdrawal of certain social warmth, that Miss Caroline Ashford was not quite what they had hoped for. Not enough fortune, not quite the right sort. Caroline, who had more dignity than the situation deserved, had withdrawn quietly. The Vanes had then presented themselves as the injured party, which the Ashfords had not forgotten. None of this, it now appeared, had happened. Caroline's letter made no mention of any of this. She wrote as a woman who had been very much in love with someone else, and had assumed the practical difficulties would resolve themselves. She did not write as someone who had been looked down upon, or made to feel unwelcome, or treated poorly. She did not write as someone who had suffered. She wrote, he read the passage a 3rd time to be certain, as someone who had barely thought of any of it since. Caroline had not, it occurred to him, behaved particularly well. She had simply behaved like someone entirely certain of her own happiness, which, in his experience, amounted to much the same thing. The Ashfords had known she married, had known she settled in Shropshire with a Frenchman named Beaumont, who had been her husband for 30 years and died in 1811. In the ordinary way of things, a dancing master would have been mortifying enough. But England had been at war with France for the better part of 2 decades, and a man from Lyon had become, over time, the kind of thing a family simply did not speak of. It had been considerably easier to let it be known that the Vanes had been difficult. His mother had spoken of the Vanes as recently as last week, the usual terms, the usual tone. Cold people, proud, not the sort one ought to get entangled with. He had not argued. He had not had reason to. He walked to the Dower House that afternoon and put the letter on the table in front of her without preamble. She read it without expression. This was not unusual. Lady Ashford's face in moments of difficulty had always resembled a particularly well-maintained estate. Everything in order, nothing available for comment.
She was your father's sister,
she said when she set the letter down.
I did not know her well. She had already gone to Shropshire by the time we married.
Did you know she had married a Frenchman?
A pause.
One heard. It was not spoken of.
Did anyone in this family ever ask what had actually happened between Caroline and the Vanes?
His mother looked at the letter, then she looked at the window.
Your father believed the Vanes had behaved badly. I thought it best to agree with him.
You chose agreement over inquiry for 30 years.
She did not reply, which was, he supposed, its own kind of answer. He sat with this for the better part of 2 days. Then he rode to Vane House. Philippa was in the estate office when the footman brought word that Mr. Ashford had called and wished to speak with her on an urgent matter. She went to him at once. He was waiting in the hall. She took him to the library.
I have had a letter from my Aunt Caroline,
he said, when the door was closed.
Mrs. Beaumont, as she has been these 30 years, widowed since 1811.
He retrieved the letter from his coat.
I should like to read you a passage. I think you ought to hear it in her own words.
He read it. When he finished, he set the letter down between them.
She assumed the families would settle themselves because she was so completely happy,
Philippa said.
Wishful thinking.
So it appears.
She looked at the window. Outside, the summer light was the flat, even kind that lit everything without distinction.
She told him, I will give her that, but she left a very great deal of tidying up for other people. My father never spoke about it directly, only that there was a history, that the Ashfords were...
She stopped.
He never said what, precisely.
Nor did mine. Too proud to admit they had been left with someone else's mess. She sends warm regards to your father,
he added.
She says he was a very good sort of young man.
Philippa said nothing for a moment.
May I read it?
He gave it to her. She read it. When she set it down, she was quiet for a moment.
My family's account,
she said at last,
was that Miss Ashford broke the engagement without a word of explanation, 3 weeks before the wedding. No reason, no apology. The Ashford family offered nothing in response, no acknowledgement, no regrets.
He looked at her steadily.
My family's story was that your father's family had made plain Caroline was not quite what they had hoped for. Not enough fortune. Not the right connections. She withdrew with what dignity she could manage, and your family then had the effrontery to consider themselves the injured party.
A silence.
She says quite clearly that she told him, which rather changes the picture.
She did,
Crispin agreed.
And then she went to Shropshire and assumed the rest would sort itself.
Neither family knew the truth.
Your father knew she had chosen someone else. He chose not to say so.
She looked at him.
I imagine he was mortified,
she said after a moment.
She had chosen a French dancing master over an English baronet's son. He would not have wished to tell his family that.
No,
Crispin agreed.
And my family would not have told anyone that she had married a Frenchman. Not while we were at war with France. It was far simpler to blame the Vanes.
So both families kept the truth hidden for entirely different reasons.
And 30 years passed.
Philippa looked at the letter.
She has been in Shropshire this entire time.
Quite happily, it seems.
Something moved across her face. Not quite a laugh, not yet.
I don't think she has given any of us much thought at all.
It took a while for the full weight of the letter to settle in.
From France.
Yes,
He died peacefully.
in the spring of 1811.
Peacefully and at home.
Yes.
In Shropshire.
The sound that came out of her was not quite a laugh. And then it was. Mr. Ashford was looking at her with that expression she had come to recognise, the one that meant he found it equally absurd and had not yet decided whether to admit it.
I'm sorry,
she managed.
Don't be.
He said. And then he laughed.
30 years of festering ill will.
She could barely speak for laughing.
Over a dancing master from France.
Who died happy.
Who died happy in Shropshire? Your family was not merely embarrassed about the dancing. He was French, during the wars.
Yes.
Crispin looked entirely untroubled by this.
I think that accounts for the silence rather completely.
And my father was too mortified to admit he had been jilted for the enemy.
Both families protecting entirely different versions of their dignity.
They were both well past dignified. They laughed until it ran out. He was aware, suddenly and specifically, of the distance between them. It was not much distance. At some point Miss Vane had moved closer, or he had. There was considerably less space between them than there had been. She looked up and met his gaze. He did not look away. A moment passed in which neither of them did anything, and both of them were aware that nothing was happening, and that this was a decision.
Miss Vane.
She did not quite look at him.
Thank you for coming.
He rode home. He thought about what he had almost said, and almost done. He could not determine whether the decision not to had been propriety or cowardice. He put the letter in the desk drawer. He told himself it had been the correct decision. He did not entirely believe this. Chapter 9. The night before. The final list was 3 items long. The flowers for the entrance hall were confirmed for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The last 50 chairs, the question that had caused 3 separate arguments in April, were to be delivered by the Martin men at noon, under the supervision of Mr. Price, who had strong opinions about chair arrangement and would not require further direction. The musicians had been instructed to arrive by 5 o'clock that evening. She had been working from lists for 8 weeks and was used to the feeling of completion, the small satisfaction of ink drawn through a line of text. She drew a line through the last item. This was not that. She moved to the window. The committee had begun in April, and it was now nearly midsummer. 8 weeks of Wednesdays. 8 weeks of letters and minutes, and that particular sensation of trying to keep an argument from becoming a row while someone else tried to do the same. 8 weeks of a project she had been entirely certain she did not want, conducted alongside a man who had entirely failed to remain the person she had decided he was. The ball was tomorrow. Dora had been in that afternoon for the decorating committee's final meeting, but did not leave until Philippa agreed to let her send her maid over tomorrow to do something more intricate with her hair. She had already talked Philippa into ordering a gown for the occasion, elaborate, with a lower neckline than Philippa was entirely comfortable with, and had left on both counts with the pleased expression of a woman whose mission had been successfully accomplished. Philippa had been secretly very pleased with the gown. She did not put up much of a struggle for the hair. She sat down at the writing desk and found she had nothing further to write. There was always something further to write. She sat with the absence of it for a while, which did not suit her, and which she made no particular effort to remedy. She was in the drawing-room at 7:30 when the footman came to say that Mr. Ashford had called on a matter regarding the committee. She was not expecting anyone. She had thought in a general way that everything had been settled. There was nothing left to confirm. He was in the hall with a piece of paper in his hand, folded, official-looking, which he held with the air of something that needed consulting.
The musicians,
he said, when he saw her.
I had a question about the musicians.
What question?
He glanced at the paper.
The order of the programme.
She looked at him steadily.
We have already settled the order of the programme.
I know.
A pause. Neither of them moved toward the sitting room. The hall was the hall, narrow, lamplit, the clock she had wound herself since her mother died, and they were standing in it.
I had it written here, but I may have written it wrong. The boccherini, while the guests arrive, then a waltz to open the dancing, then the country dances, supper, the country dances resumed, and a waltz to close.
Yes. That was what I understood also.
Then it is correct. Good.
He did not leave. She looked at the piece of paper, which he lowered slightly, as though suddenly aware of it. It was folded in the manner of something that had never been opened.
Is there anything else?
There was a silence. The clock marked a quarter minute.
I wanted to say,
He stopped and began again.
You have managed everything very well.
We both have.
You manage the things I would have done impatiently.
He said it without any hint of flattery. It was an observation, the kind he made when he had reached a conclusion and saw no reason not to state it.
The correspondence, Colonel Marsh.
A pause.
I noticed.
She held very still. It was, technically, a professional observation. It did not feel entirely professional. There was something in the way he said it that made it sound like something else, like a man who had been paying attention to rather more than the programme order.
You managed the stabling very well. I noticed that also.
I wondered if you had.
The clock ticked. She was a woman of 31 who had managed her father's estate for many years and run a committee alongside her family's enemy without once losing her composure. She was perfectly capable of standing in her own hall.
I should not like it to end.
She did not answer immediately, letting the words settle into the space between them. He did not press. He stood there with the unopened piece of paper and waited, which she had come to recognize as his version of patience.
It will have to end,
she said, very composedly.
That is the nature of balls.
Yes.
He accepted this without argument, looked at her for a moment. That expression she had not been able to name for 8 weeks, the one she kept classifying as professional attention and finding, the next morning, that the classification did not hold, and then inclined his head.
Good night, Miss Vane.
Good night, Mr. Ashford.
She opened the door and closed it again before his carriage had moved, a decision she made deliberately and knew it. Her father appeared in the corridor approximately 4 minutes later, in his evening coat, with his glass of port, and looked at her in the mildly inquiring way of a man who had heard a door close.
Was that young Ashford?
It was Mr. Ashford, yes. A matter about the programme order.
Her father considered this.
Is the programme order unsettled?
No.
Ah.
He nodded and looked at her more carefully than she would have liked.
You know, Philippa, you have that look you used to get before important occasions. When you were small, you would eat half your supper and then say you weren't hungry.
I am not a child, Father.
No,
he agreed.
Which is why I am not suggesting warm milk. Although cook makes it very well. She puts nutmeg in it.
I have no need of warm milk.
It is very settling.
I am perfectly settled.
He looked at her with a great deal of fond disbelief and said nothing further, which, of all the things her father did, she found most difficult to argue with. She looked at him for a moment. There was something she might have said. She decided against it. She went to bed. She lay in the dark with the window open, the faint smell of early summer coming in from the garden, and she thought, the ball is tomorrow. The ball will be very good. She had worked too hard for it to be otherwise. When it was done, the committee would dissolve, her Wednesdays would be free, and she would write no more letters about programme orders. The county would have its ball and its relief fund, and she would return to the ordinary sequence of her days. This was what she had wanted. She had been saying so for 8 weeks. She thought of him saying, I should not like it to end. She made a list, in her head, of the things she had not said in reply. This was not, she found, as useful an exercise as her lists usually were. It was not, on the whole, a restful way to spend an evening. He rode home. He had rehearsed at various points in the day a number of ways to begin. A question about the programme order had seemed, at the time, sufficient reason. He should have anticipated she would see through it immediately. She always knew when things were settled. He had said, I should not like it to end. She had said, it will have to end. That is the nature of balls. It was a deflection. She knew it was. And so did he. He had let her take it anyway. He was not certain whether that had been courtesy or cowardice. He had asked the same question in the Vane library 2 weeks ago. She had not answered it then either. The carriage left Vane House behind. The evening was still light, the kind of June light that lingered longer than it had any right to. The ball was tomorrow. Once it was done, there was no further business, no programme order to confirm, no pretext he had not already exhausted. He had not decided what he was going to do about this. He was aware that failing to decide was itself a kind of decision, and that he did not think well of men who defaulted to inaction when something wanted doing. He was aware this now applied to him. He had closed the door before his carriage had moved. She knew exactly which things she had not said. He had the same knowledge from the other side of it. There was still tomorrow. By the time he arrived home, he had decided what he intended to do with it. Chapter 10. The Ball. She had been at Ashford Park since noon, the flowers, the supper tables, a disagreement between the head footman and the man sent by the florist that Philippa resolved in 4 sentences without raising her voice. Mr. Ashford was already in the kitchens when she arrived, and took the stable arrangements without being asked. They did not get in each other's way. They had stopped doing that some weeks ago. Lady Ashford moved through all of it with the composed authority of a woman entirely at home, which she was. She had arranged a room for Philippa to change in, a small, well-appointed guest room on the first floor, and had mentioned it in the tone of someone performing a courtesy so naturally that it could not be refused or remarked upon. Philippa had thanked her. Lady Ashford had smiled. It was, all things considered, progress. At 6, she excused herself and went upstairs. Dora's maid was waiting. The gown was the colour of deep gold, and the neckline was... It was fine. It was perfectly fine. She had been saying so since April. She came back downstairs at 6:30. Mr. Ashford was in the entrance hall directing the repositioning of a chair, his back to the stairs. He had changed into his evening clothes, dark coat, white cravat, and wore them as well as she had always suspected he would. He was, she noted, in a purely observational capacity, a very well-made man. He turned when he heard her on the stairs. He went quite still. She noted this and continued down the stairs at the same pace.
The musicians are in place,
she said.
The supper room is ready. The Beresfords have not yet arrived.
He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He closed it again.
Good,
she said.
Then we are ready.
She moved past him toward the ballroom. She did not look back. She knew exactly where he was anyway. The ballroom was everything she had planned, and somewhat more than she had hoped. The flowers, the supper room, the candles, all of it precisely as intended. She allowed herself, for approximately 30 seconds, to be satisfied. Then the Beresfords arrived. Mrs. Beresford was a stout, cheerful woman of 60, with a tendency to ignore any arrangement not of her own devising. She arrived with her husband, her 2 daughters, and 4 pugs, which she distributed between the arms of her family members with the efficiency of a woman who had done this many times before. The footman Philippa had assigned to manage the situation took one look at Mrs. Beresford's expression and revised his strategy accordingly. The pugs were called Brutus, Nero, Cassius, and something that sounded like Pip. Brutus had already identified the curtains. She looked across the ballroom. Mr. Ashford, standing with Mr. Holt near the orchestra platform, had seen them at precisely the same moment. He looked at Brutus. He looked at the curtains. He looked at her. She gave a very slight shake of her head. Not yet. He understood her meaning. She could tell by the particular quality of his resignation, and returned his attention to Mr. Holt. Cassius made for the supper room. The footman intercepted him. The Boccherini, a string quintet, light and unhurried, continued from the north end of the ballroom. The guests arrived in the warm June evening, the women in their light silks, the candles throwing gold across the floor. It was, Philippa thought, quite beautiful. Brutus had his teeth in the curtain fringe and was pulling with considerable conviction, to the consternation of the footman and Mr. Ashford. The opening waltz was announced. There was a brief, collective intake of breath from the elder of the Lovelace sisters, who had hoped, perhaps, that it had been a theoretical waltz. It had not. The evening began. The supper interval was announced at 9:30. The ballroom emptied with a speed that suggested the dancing had been, for many guests, an agreeable prelude to the main event. The supper room had been laid with precision. Philippa had counted the covers herself that afternoon. As the guests settled, she caught a glimpse of the caterer who had talked his way into the commission 6 weeks ago. He had, at that point, appeared unflappable. He appeared considerably more flappable now. He was directing 3 footmen simultaneously, his cravat listing slightly to one side, and he did not look up as she passed. Philippa was crossing the corridor when she heard it, a particular quality of rustling from behind the serving screen, and then Mr. Ashford's voice, very quiet and very dry.
Colonel Marsh.
A pause.
I was merely...
I can see what you were merely doing.
She kept walking. Somewhere behind that screen, Colonel Marsh was being relieved of his contraband. The pasties his wife's uncle manufactured in considerable quantities, and which had not been on the approved supper menu. She had no need to be involved. She took her seat. The supper was excellent. A fricassee of chicken, a ragout of vegetables, cold ham and raised pies, and a blanc-mange that had been arranged with more ambition than was strictly necessary. Colonel Marsh arrived at the table shortly after, with the expression of a man who had been caught doing something and had decided the best approach was to behave as though he had not. He regarded the French dishes like a man conducting a private diplomatic negotiation and finding the terms unsatisfactory. He helped himself to the ham. Mr. Holt rose between the first and second courses to address the room. He thanked the guests. He announced the tombola results with his customary warmth. He then turned to the watercolour competition. 7 ladies had submitted pieces. The committee had deliberated, he said, with great care. Philippa was not on the judging committee. She watched. Mrs. Alderton, seated 3 places to her left, rose from her chair.
Mrs. Harriet Fenn,
said Mr. Holt. A pause. Mrs. Alderton sat back down. Mrs. Fenn, small, white-haired, who had submitted a piece to every Midsummer Ball for 11 years and received on each occasion a warm word and second place, looked as though she had not entirely heard correctly. Her neighbour nudged her. She stood, very slowly, walked to the front of the room, accepted the ribbon, and began to cry with the quiet sincerity of a woman who had not expected to be moved by anything this evening and found herself entirely wrong. The room, which had been politely attentive, became genuinely so. Philippa found, to her own surprise, that she had to look away. She was not, as a rule, easily moved by public ceremonies. She made a note to examine this later and did not examine it at all. Mrs. Alderton received the patroness ribbon shortly afterward, her husband having again contributed most generously to the donated lots. She accepted it with the expression of someone reconciling herself to one form of victory in the absence of another. The guests began to drift back toward the ballroom. The musicians were tuning. The guests filtered back in, filling the room with the particular hum of a county that had something new to talk about. The truth about Caroline had been circulating since Lady Ashford had mentioned the letter to Mrs. Partridge over dinner 2 weeks prior, and Mrs. Partridge, who had not kept a secret since 1798, had not kept it long. Sir George heard it, Philippa gathered from Colonel Marsh, who had apparently recovered his composure with remarkable speed, sometime during supper. She had not been present. She had, however, been close enough to hear her father laugh, a full, genuine laugh, the kind she had not heard directed at anything connected with the Ashford family in 30 years.
Father,
My dear,
he said, still smiling.
did you know that Caroline Ashford ran off with a Frenchman,
I had heard something to that effect.
a dancing master?
He shook his head, not with the surprise of a man hearing news, but with the particular relief of one who had been holding it quietly for many years and found the weight suddenly lifted.
Well, well.
He looked, she thought, considerably lighter than he had in some time. The country dances resumed at 10:30. Philippa managed proceedings from the edge of the room with the efficiency of a woman who had several things to oversee and preferred to oversee them at close range. Miss Arabella Wyndham appeared at Mr. Ashford's elbow during the third country dance. She offered something, an observation, a smile, delivered with the confidence of a young woman who had been waiting all evening for her moment. He answered with perfect courtesy, and then excused himself and came across the room towards Philippa. He had not, he reflected as he crossed it, recovered entirely from the moment she appeared at the top of the stairs. She had been wearing gold, deep, warm gold silk with a net overlay that caught the candlelight when she moved, with an enchanting décolleté trimmed with cream lace. Her hair, which she habitually pinned back with a severity that brooked no argument, had been dressed differently, softer, with dark curls at her temples and small seed pearls threaded through the arrangement. She looked like herself, but the version of herself she kept very carefully out of sight. He had, regrettably, been unable to offer any observation on the subject. The shock had made this difficult.
There is one item on the programme,
he said when he reached her,
that has not yet been addressed.
Whatever do you mean?
The closing waltz.
What about it?
Miss Vane,
He said it with the patience he deployed when he had already decided something and was giving her the opportunity to catch up.
the ball raises more money when the co-chairs are seen to participate.
A pause. The musicians were tuning at the far end of the room.
Very well,
she said, and took his arm. The feeling during the waltz was different from everything that had preceded it. His attention was the same attention he had given to everything she had done for 8 weeks. Steady, particular, entirely focused on her. She had been classifying it as professional. She understood now that she had been wrong. At some point during the second figure, she looked up at him, and something in his expression, carefully composed as it usually was, had slipped very slightly. She was not entirely sure what she looked like in return. Whatever it was, it made him smile. It was not a large smile. It was the kind that arrived before a man had decided to allow it. She smiled back. From somewhere near the supper room there came a cheer. From somewhere near the windows, an audible groan. A brief collective rustle ran around the edges of the ballroom.
What on earth was that for?
I believe that the county has been taking an interest in our evening.
She considered this.
The 3 bells.
The 3 bells.
He confirmed, with the expression of a man who had nothing further to add to the subject. It was their first dance. 8 weeks of Wednesdays had been building towards something. He had not, until this moment, understood precisely what. They did not say much. There was not much that needed saying. When the last guests had gone, the staff moved through the room with quiet efficiency, extinguishing candles, gathering glasses. Philippa stood near the window and found that Mr. Ashford was still beside her.
Miss Vane.
She turned.
Last night you told me it would have to end. That is the nature of balls.
He looked at her with the steady attention she had spent 8 weeks misclassifying.
The ball has ended.
She held very still.
I should like to call on you tomorrow. Not about the committee. Not about anything connected with the ball.
He stopped and began again with the care of a man who had rehearsed this and found the rehearsal entirely inadequate.
I find that I have no interest in returning to the state of affairs that existed before April.
No, neither have I.
He had not been entirely certain what she would say. Fairly certain, for he was a man who assessed situations with some accuracy. But fairly certain and entirely certain were different things, and the difference, it turned out, mattered considerably. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, exactly. More like relief. She thought of the times she had avoided his questions, and was very glad that had not been the case tonight. The house was quiet around them, and they stayed where they were. Epilogue. Vane House, Wiltshire, August 1815. The engagement party had been Lady Ashford's suggestion, which Philippa had found either encouraging or alarming. She had not yet decided which. Both families had been performing warm approval for 6 weeks with the commitment of people who had decided, by general agreement, that this was what they were doing now. Lady Ashford had called on Philippa twice, once formally, once less so, and had been, on both occasions, warmly civil in a way that Philippa was beginning to suspect might actually be warm. Sir George had shaken Crispin's hand at their first meeting, said, "Well, well," in much the same tone he had used about the dancing master, and had not found it necessary to say anything further on the subject. Mrs. Caroline Beaumont arrived on a Thursday in August with 2 trunks, a cheerful disposition, and a complete absence of any awareness that she had been the subject of a county-wide feud for 30 years. She was small and bright-eyed, with her late husband's ring still on her right hand. A plain gold band she wore with the unself-conscious ease of a woman who had loved someone for a long time and saw no reason to take the ring off now that he was gone. She had, she mentioned over tea, often wondered how Sir George was getting on. Sir George was fetched from the garden, where he had been avoiding the formal part of the afternoon with the practised ease of a man who had been doing so for 30 years. He came into the drawing room. Mrs. Beaumont looked up. There was a pause. It was not a long one. They were both 70, or thereabouts, and they had been young once, and it had been a very long time ago, and the whole business had been, in retrospect, perfectly absurd. Mrs. Beaumont began to smile first. Sir George, who had laughed loudest at the ball and had not quite finished laughing since, was not far behind.
Mrs. Beaumont,
Sir George, you look very well.
I'm told
He said, pulling up a chair.
that your husband was a very fine dancer.
He was the finest dancer in 3 counties.
She opened her reticule and produced a small oval miniature in a gold case, a dark-eyed man with an expressive face and a very fine coat.
Would you like to see?
Sir George, it emerged, would very much like to see. Philippa and Crispin left them to it. The garden at Vane House was at its best in August, the roses still going. The kitchen garden productive and orderly, the air warm and unhurried. They walked as far as the wall at the far end before either of them spoke. She had also, as it happened, heard something recently from Colonel Marsh about the 3 bells.
I had no idea I was marrying a betting man.
He looked at the roses.
How so?
Crispin.
I considered it a reasonable expression of confidence in the undertaking.
It was a very large bet.
I had a great deal of confidence.
She looked at him. He continued to examine the roses with the focused attention of a man who had recently discovered an interest in horticulture.
Was the wager for the ball's completion or for the secondary matter? Whether we would smile at one another?
A slightly longer pause.
Both, naturally.
She kissed him on the cheek. Somewhere back in the house, Sir George was looking at the picture of the dancing master. The end. And so Philippa Vane has laid down her arms and found her home at Ashford Park. If this story stayed with you, another is waiting. The Duke and Miss Finch follows Miss Matilda Finch and the Duke of Lyndhurst, who came home to restore order and found something far more unsettling in his meadow. Warmth, wit, and a slow burn love that neither of them planned for. Tap the video on your screen to continue listening. I shall return soon with another romance, unless the committee draws my name again.